All right, good evening. Well, about this time last year, I was about as far away from home as I have ever been. Had an opportunity to go to the island of Guadalcanal and shoot a series of videos there on the Guadalcanal campaign that took place there in 1942 and 1943. Also had the chance to walk the ground with a number of historians. So it wasn't just me blundering around like what I normally do. So we had with us Phil Bradley. We had Peter Williams, both of who we have had on this podcast or on this YouTube channel. And we also had with us probably the man who is regarded as the foremost authority on the Guadalcanal campaign, Dave Holland. And while we were there, Dave was actually in the process of writing his first book about a specific element of the Guadalcanal campaign. Well, that book is finished and is set to be released here very soon. So I wanted to bring in Dave to talk about his book and maybe talk about a few things that we covered in that series and maybe a few things that we didn't. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in Dave all the way from Australia. I think right now it's tomorrow where you're at, right?
No, it's today. Hey, JD, thanks again for allowing me to about Guadalcanal. I'm always open for it. Yeah, it's the next day. It's about 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, so that's why I'm so happy because I'm not at work. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, I'm not the expert on I'm not really expert really, but not the air and the sea. I'm I'm an infantry guy, so there's a lot better people out there. Knows more. But yeah, I'm always happy to talk about the land, and I probably know enough about the sea and air just to get away. Know more than probably one more other person. So yeah, happy.
So your book is at the time that we're filming this, it's going to be a little over a week. I think it's already released in Britain, correct?
Well, yeah, because it's the public, the U.S. group. They print the book over in England, or sorry, Britain, and yeah, probably about 3 weeks ago, some of the European buyers were getting the book. But Casemate, if you order it directly from Casemate, I was receiving notification from others this week that they've received theirs. So they've been getting it over the. I think other sellers, like say for example Amazon US, I think they started on the 30th, and I've got people that said they were getting the book notifications around the 10th, 11th of November. So it's released. And I don't know about the other sellers. I mean, you can buy it through all the other popular books. But yeah, we're in the middle of it now. It's about to come out big time, I guess, if you would.
I was hoping that my copy was already going to be in. I was going to do a live unboxing of it, but it's kind of appropriate that in the United States, it's going to be dropping on the Marine Corps birthday, I believe, right?
In November, 250 years. So that's going to be a big one. Or if it drops on Veterans Day. So I'm happy either way. It's a good.
Yeah, absolutely. So here is the book, Guadalcanal's Longest Fight, the Pivotal Battles of the Matanikau Front. Now we've had Dave on here before, and we've talked about a lot of the background with the Guadalcanal campaign. A lot of people mistakenly call it the Battle of Guadalcanal, but it's really a whole campaign that has a whole bunch of battles within it. So if you go and you watch the series that I did, or if you watch anything on Dave's YouTube channel, you can see stuff about Alligator Creek, and you can see stuff about Bloody Ridge and Tulagi and Gavutu and Tanambogo. What we're going to be focusing specifically on right here is where the most sustained combat took place during the Guadalcanal campaign, and that is on the Matanikau. Now, Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It seems to me that there's a lot of focus that gets put on like Alligator Creek. There's a lot of focus that gets put on Bloody Ridge or Edson's Ridge, and then of course, the fight where Basilone performs actions that lead to him being awarded the Medal of Honor. It seems like the stuff that happens around the Matanikau, I don't know if it's taken a back seat or if it slipped through the cracks. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh yeah, it's very fair. I talk about it quite a bit, obviously, in the book, especially my introduction and the conclusion. Yeah, I mean, there's a number of factors involved because you got Bloody Ridge or Edson's Ridge, Bloody Ridge, and Alligator Creek. Very important battles, but yet in the scheme of the campaign, they were small, localized events. But they're great American victories. The Alligator Creek was the first real victory. It actually showed they could beat the Japanese. So that's very important. Then the desperate fight on Edson's Ridge in September. So they're very good, important battles. And I think some of the Americans like to relive the past glories. And plus, too, they're used to be Alligator Creek, very well preserved battlefields. So you got Matanikau. Matanikau was built over. The whole area was built over right after the fighting. In fact, in early 43, the Americans started knocking the coconut trees down and concreting the whole place to build a large logistical and training base. So a lot of the battlefield was covered over. And through the years, when veterans go back or tourists go there, you've been to Harniar, you look and it's really just a urban sprawl.
Yeah.
But then you go to Edson's Ridge or Alligator Creek and just see a very well preserved battlefield. Like I said, not Alligator Creek anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately.
YouTube and you can see it. But yeah, and then plus also Matanikau, a lot of the veterans don't want to relive the Matanikau. The Americans suffered victories and defeats on Matanikau. Matanikau was a hard struggle. It went from basically of the 6-month campaign, 5 months they were fighting around Matanikau Front. So when I say Matanikau Front, that's Matanikau River to Point Cruz. So roughly 1 mile wide, but 1 mile, maybe a mile and a half deep. So that was roughly 6 large battles, a number of smaller engagements, skirmishes. 1/3 of all the land deaths occurred for the Americans on the Matanikau Front. It was just a big seesaw battle back and forth. So, but that area hasn't really got the attention that it deserves through a number of scholars and authors and veterans through the years. But there's a number of reasons, but I won't get into all of them today. But yeah, I'm really covered in the book.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the Matanikau, for people who are unfamiliar with the Guadalcanal campaign, we're talking about the Matanikau River, which is at least early on in the fight on the western side of the battlefield. I can't tell you how many people I've run into who don't know how big Guadalcanal really is. They're used to being exposed to battles like Iwo Jima or Saipan or Tinian or Okinawa, where the battle enveloped the whole island. Guadalcanal, it's only taking up a small part, and yeah, this is basically, for all intents and purposes, the battlefield. But before we get into the battle or the battles that take place on the Matanikau, if you don't mind, I'm kind of interested in like the writing process and some of the stuff that went into this. I was talking with our mutual friend Paul Woodage from World War II TV, and he told me one time we were talking about Normandy stuff, of course, and he said that he can pick up a book on any of the stuff that happened in Normandy. And he said, once you get through the introduction, you start getting into the meat of the book. He said, I can tell within about 10 pages if this author has ever set foot on the ground or not. And I got an advanced copy of the book, and the fact that you have spent so much time walking the ground in Guadalcanal really bleeds through with this book. Can you tell me a little bit about your background on the island of Guadalcanal?
Yeah, I might have mentioned it in another episode, but I'll briefly go over.
Sure.
Yeah, so has originate to a woman actually, but I don't go right on the story. Yeah, so I was in the Marines, U.S. Marines for 8 years, and part of the Marines role is to provide security for embassies, and I was on that program, Department of State. So I ended up in Canberra, Australia, and I met an Australian, went back to the States, did my last couple of year and a half in the Marines. Then after 2 years, I was a policeman in the States. We decided to move back to Australia. So I moved to Australia, and I joined the police over here in the state and federal police. But part of the Australian Federal Police, their international group, so they provide peacekeeping and operations and liaison officers all around the world. So at the time, we had say time, so that's Australian. That's my Alabama accent coming in. But at the time, the AFP, the federal police, had a ongoing peacekeeping operation mission in the Solomon Islands. So when I first heard of that, I said Solomon Islands, and then it said no, specifically Guadalcanal. And being a former Marine and a history nut, I'm going to make my way there. So I did. I managed to go there the first time in 2009. So I was there for 4 months. And that was enough for me to I'll say, scratch the surface on basically what actually occurred on Guadalcanal. I mean, I was doing operational missions at the time, but any of my spare time, I was walking the grounds as most I can, visiting the sites that most tourists visit. And then I was actually leading people because I knew a little bit about it more than the average guy. So that led into a couple of other deployments, small deployments here and there. And those operational deployments, I was actually walking the ground, doing patrols and doing some of the stuff that the soldiers and the Marines did. Obviously not in the combat, but it was, I got a good, I guess, appreciation of the terrain and the conditions. And then in 2018, I scored what I call it the research jackpot. I spent 2 solid years on Guadalcanal as an advisor to the Royal Solomon Island Police, still in the AFP. But that allowed me to really walk the ground, and I made it a goal to study the terrain, study the ground, look at the primary resources, read everything I could about Guadalcanal, then compare. Okay, did it actually play or did it not? And most times it did, but most times it didn't. And other times it did not. And then when I was there, I was leading tours. I was doing all the VIP tours, but I was really, it allowed me the time to do some deep research. Mm-hmm. So 2020, I left my deployment, but I continued my whole Guadalcanal research and interest. Then I established a Facebook page. I was very active on that, and had authors and other people reaching out to me to help and to assist. I was on podcasts. So I was really deeply involved in it. And it got to a point where my wife always told me, you should write a book about it. I said, I can't write a book. I don't know anything about writing a book. So I thought, well, I'm going to potentially write a book, because I was speaking to my friend Seth Paradon, who's a historian. You need to write a book. You pull your finger out your, as I say in Australia, pull your finger out. I said, okay. So I thought, well, hold on a minute. I've got 26 years as a professional investigator, right? I've got a whole time of study military history. And plus, like you just said, I've walked the ground. I know it. Like you said about Paul Woodedge, I mean, I can read anything on Guadalcanal, and I can know in 3 seconds if an author's been there or not. And I thought, well, I could do this, but I need some good mentorship. So I reached out to, I know, and authors is a guy called retired Colonel John Hoffman. Okay. And he, very well-known Marine historian. When he retired out of the Marines, he became the chief historian of the U.S. Army. So John is a hard taskmaster. So he was one of my mentors. Dr. Peter Williams was another mentor. So I used to bounce things back and forth off of them. And if you look at my book, the foreword is written by Colonel Hoffman. And I will guarantee, if you know John Hoffman, he won't put his name to anything that, that's his credibility. And John's my friend, but I said, would you write the foreword? He goes, I got to see it first. Yeah, of course. And then I sent it to him, and then he read the whole thing, and he goes, yes, I'll write you forward. And he was quite amazed at some of the stuff that, he's a professional Marine historian. It's written a biography of Edson, Mark Edson, and Puller, and a number of, and he actually learned some stuff that people wasn't aware of. So, yeah, so once I did, I went through the whole process. It took me about a year, going backwards and forth. And yeah, I did it. And you have to be very disciplined. I guarantee you. be very organized. So I guess, I don't know, maybe my micromanaging mind, blame that on Paris Holland for good. Yeah, but I had the tools. I didn't know it, but I had the tools because I was speaking to quote historians, professional historians. I said, "What did you learn to be a historian?" They said, "Well, research and all that." And I go, "Well, I've been a professional investigator to state and federal level. I interviewed thousands of people and I've done brief of evidence. This is the same as collecting a brief. Is just make sure that you're just trying to find the truth,
Yeah.
corroborate supporting evidence and firsthand accounts and primary and all that. So yeah, I do it. I had the tools. Just had to put it together.
Nice. Yeah, and you actually hit on something I was going to ask about, who some of your mentors were, going through the process and everything like that. Well, let's go ahead and get into it here. So, why is it that the Matanikau is such a point of focus for the U.S. First Marine Forces and then Army going into this battle or going into this campaign?
That's a good question, JD. I don't know. No, shouldn't say that. That'd be good. No, so basically Matanikau is 5 miles to the west of, like you've got it there. Thanks for the map, but it's 5 miles west of the perimeter of Henderson Field, and it's a natural barrier. So when the Marines landed on the 7th of August, the Japanese garrison at that stage, roughly about 3,000 Japanese, mainly construction troops, Korean laborers with some Japanese engineers and a few security forces sprinkled in. A guy called Captain Monson, IGA or IGN, Imperial Navy captain, was the base. So he basically seen this big fleet. The rounds started coming in, naval rounds. He said, grab everything you got for 3 days and head to the Matanikau, because that was their natural defense point. Then they were going to regroup there, wait for reinforcements, and then proceed to take the airfield back. So that's where the original garrison went. And some of these construction troops, they went east, west, south, wherever, and they were in the jungles. And that's when we read the first accounts of the Marines. They're rounding them up out of the jungle. But roughly about 300 of his security, the Special Naval Landing Force guys, had moved to Matanikau. So the photo you're looking at here, this is probably about December 42, January 43. So this is the Matanikau. This is the area we're talking about. That's the mouth of the Matanikau River. So that's looking south. To the left is the east bank. To the right is the west bank. And you'll see how the natural terrain is on Guadalcanal. You got those low-lying ridges, coastal ridges, excuse me, and they're coral covered. So there's not much vegetation grows on them. So that's natural. That's a kunai grass. And then in the ravines below is a thick jungle, as you see here, there. And you'll notice, well, you probably won't notice from this distance, but there is a road. There was a pre-war road called the Government Track, because pre-war, there was acres and acres and acres of these coconut plantations by the Lever Brothers company. So you can see some of the coconut trees to the right there, plantation. But they had this one coastal track road, they called it, that basically serviced the coconut plantations. And when you get to the Matanikau River, I mean, that's a very fast, fresh, fast-flowing, freshwater, pretty wide river. The only way you're going to get across that river is at the mouth, generally at low tide on the sandbar. There's no other bridges on the river, and that's how they used to get across the mouth of the sandbar, which would be very important to the campaign, to both the Japanese and the Americans. That crossing point at Matanikau. So that's Matanikau, and that's at this stage. We'll just leave it there at the early stages, if its importance to the Japanese. At this stage at the campaign in August, we're talking about mid-August, it's not that important to the Americans, because the most important thing to the Americans is the airfield, completing the airfield and defending the airfield. That's the most important point. And another point, they had 4 points when Vancouver landed at the very beginning. One of the points is to find the original garrison, because their intelligence report said there's 5,000 Japanese on the island. Where did they go? We need to find them. And once we need to find them, we need either to capture them or we need to kill them. And that way, if we eliminate the garrison from the island, then the island's ours. And like you said before, it wasn't about the fight of the island. The island, Guadalcanal, is about the same size for U.S. viewers as the state of Delaware. It's 90 miles long and 25 miles wide, so it's very big. But the majority of fighting was in 15 miles, as we know. It's all not about possession of the land. It was about the airfield. And that was why Vandergrift, the division commander, was so very good and very switched on. He knew the importance. While others like Joint Chief of Staff and other commanders higher up were saying, grab the airfield, grab the island for land. He had recognized the strategic importance of an airfield in the Pacific campaign when some of the older heads hadn't realized that yet, because it's the very beginning. So now we have early August. So the Japanese are there, original garrison, waiting for reinforcements. The Marines have Henderson. They're holding it. They're trying to find the regional garrison. So this is a good photo. This is a then and a now. Unfortunately, in my book, I tried to push for the publishers to have color photos, because then and now is not as great. In the book, they're grayscale, which is like the printer's term for black and white. But you can see the difference. So the then photo we just looked at before is 1942, or maybe early 43. The now is 2024 on that one.
Okay.
Changed quite a bit. And I would encourage any viewers, well, probably not, there's a disclaimer, they'll probably actually catch something if they see your video on the through the video. It's so contaminated now. Yeah, that was disgusting. But yeah, it's changed quite a bit.
Yeah. Unfortunately. Unfortunately. So for the Marines, kind of their first or really early foray into the Matanikau region or to the Matanikau River is with something called the Goettche Patrol. I know a lot of people who are watching are big fans of the book With the Old Breed by Eugene Sledge. And in his book, he mentions something about hearing what happened with the Goettche Patrol. It became like this legendary thing that made its way for everybody who came through. Let's talk a little bit about the Goettche Patrol, and we covered this on one of our videos that we did together, but I think it'd be worth mentioning again here.
Yeah, so the Goettche Patrol, Colonel Goettche, Frank Goettche, was the division intelligence officer. He was they call him the D2, which is intelligence. It just been made colonel on the 28th of July. That threw me initially when I was doing my research, because there's a photo of him on Guadalcanal, and he's got eagles, Colonel Eagles. And I thought, I know Goetsche's a colonel, but when I'm reading all these primary accounts, he's writing him Lieutenant Colonel. Then I come across a message from 28th of July when actually on the ships that him and a couple others got promoted to colonel. So that explained that. But yeah, the Goettche Patrol, this goes back to the original garrison and trying to locate this original garrison. I won't go into the whole thing because that's a whole nother episode. Made
Sure.
one. Go quite in detail in my book. But basically, Goettche, due to some intelligence, I think he was feeling a bit, he needed to verify himself, or I guess 5,000. He had predicted there's 5,000 Japanese there. Marines got there, they didn't see hardly any Japanese, so his credibility was a bit waning. So to regain a bit of his credibility, and Goettche was a really upfront guy, he was a very aggressive fella. So they captured a Japanese warrant officer who basically told him, look, there's Japanese on the other side of Point Cruz willing to surrender. And then if you go there, they'll surrender to you. So what Goettche did, there was a patrol of 25 originally under a guy called First Sergeant Stephen Custer. And yes, he has a lineage, a fair distant, not direct lineage, but he's a distant relative of the Custer of Little Bighorn. And he'd already had a patrol ready to go. And they were going to do a reconnaissance patrol for 2 days. But what Goettche said, okay, well, there's our chance to potentially find the garrison and redeem ourselves. So what he did, he took out a lot of the combat Marines and put in a lot of his intelligence people. Once again, I don't want to go in a lot of detail of it because some of the people very questionable and highly remarkable. But long story short, they landed, instead of landing on the other side of Point Cruz, they landed at night. And they landed right at the mouth of Matanikau, or about 200 yards to the west of it. There was a guy called Colonel Bill Whalen, and I mention him quite a bit. I actually call him Mr. Matanikau. If you actually get tired of hearing him in a pool. But Whalen had been up there, and they were doing patrols with the 5th Marines, trying to locate the garrison, and the Marines being Marines, and they were doing very aggressive patrols. And they knew at the mouth of Matanikau there was some Japanese that ran in a couple of patrols, and they had some encountered a little bit of resistance at the mouth of Matanikau, so they pulled back. And Whalen actually told Goettge, he says, look, avoid the mouth of Matanikau because it's a hornet's nest. Goettge said, yeah, no problem. So once again, long story short, they landed in the wrong place at night, and they landed right in the middle of the hornet's nest. So Goettge and 21 of the rest of his patrol was killed. 3 escaped, and 3 made it back to live to tell the tale. And that sets up the first battle, Matanikau. So the Marines at that stage, when the survivors went back, they said, well, we know where the original garrison is now. We found them. They're on the mouth of Matanikau. So plans was made to go and eliminate them right now and destroy them once and for all. In fact, Colonel Hunt, who's the 5th Marine Division regimental commander, said, go up there and kill every one of the bastards. Because someone asked how many prisoners we're taking. He goes, well, will be no prisoners on this one. So they're very mad. Because one, they thought the Japanese had tricked them. And then there were reports of the patrols had went up there the next day and seen body parts. So they said the Japanese butchered them, massacred them, tricked them. And then that kind of led to the Marines saying, we're going to do payback, which leads to the first battle of Matanikau, which is the 18th and 19th of August.
So yeah, this thing with the Goettge Patrol, and what I was just showing there is some video from the episode that we did on that. Like the war in the Pacific, war in Europe were both brutal. There's an extra measure of brutality in my mind to the war in the Pacific, and right here off the bat, one of the first engagements, if you don't take into account Tulagi and Gavutu and Tanambogo and everything, it kind of sets the stage for what the rest of the Pacific War is going to look like. It's just going to get increasingly more violent and brutal as it goes on. So what are we looking at here?
Yeah, I love this photo because I've got some good maps in my book, but I love this one because this is obviously not a map, but this is an aerial photo. This aerial photo was taken on the 18th of August, 1942. So this is the day of the battle. I've zoomed in on this, as zoomed in as you could get, I guess. I can't see the Japanese, but they're in there. On the left, you can see the little white things. Actually huts of the Matanikau village. That was a pre-war village. Okay. And we know the date was on the side of this. It actually says 18th of August, the American aerial photograph. But on the 27th of August, all those huts was burnt down. So what we're looking at here is the payback for the Goettche Patrol. Now, I've got it annotated on there. It's actually the spot where the Goettche landed. So the Goettche Patrol is actually in this photo, dead, of course. So basically the plan here was to locate, well, they've already located, to pin down and destroy the original garrison. So it's going to be a battalion level attack. So one unit, which is B-15, which is, I can't say Bravo because that's a NATO phonetic alphabet. People, oh, yes, that's very wrong. It's very wrong. You know what you're talking about. Okay, sorry. Any great housing group you say in the Marines, it's my phonetic alphabet. Anyway, B-15 was going to hold the mouth of Matanikau in a holding demonstrating tactic. So L-35 was going to cross the day before, about 2,000 yards downstream. The Japanese had a log bridge. They'd built a makeshift, they call it the one log bridge, or the American called it the one log bridge. The Japanese called it Nippon Bridge. And like my friend Richard Frank calls it, is basically, it was 2 logs side by side. But anyway, it was 2,000 yards downstream. The company on the guy called Captain Spurlock had infiltrated and had made it to those ridges the day before. So what they were supposed to do is On the 18th, the 1-5 was going to try to push across the mouth, and then L Company 3-5 was going to do envelopment. At the same time, I Company of 3-5 was going to land at a place called Cucambona, which is another 5 miles to the west. And they were going to land and come up the track. So there is basically a hammer and anvil. They were going to trap the Japanese. So hold an attack, an envelopment from the side, then another company straight from the rear and box them in. So that was the plan. So over the course of 2 days, they did trap the Japanese, and they basically destroyed at least 250 to 300 of the hard security forces of the original garrison. A few escaped, but yeah, that's where they stood after that. They did see the remnants of the Goettge Patrol. Basically, at that stage, this was what, 18th. So we're talking almost a week later, and in that conditions in Guadalcanal, a body will deteriorate one day. I've dealt with a few bodies there, and you've got to get to within a day. So
I felt like I was deteriorating while I was still alive.
Yeah. But they were a rush to try to move back. They seen the bodies, and they were half partially buried, but they were so deteriorated, and they basically left them in place and said, "We'll come pick them up later." And they've never did. And the bodies are still there to this day. So they pulled back. At that stage, they said, "Look, we've almost eliminated the original garrison." Then Vandegrift said it'd probably take maybe a reinforced battalion. We'll go back and just clean up the remnants. But that leads us, which I won't go into the campaign, but that leads us to the Battle of Alligator Creek. So that happened on the 21st. So all the had activities on the other side of the perimeter, which they had to address. But then, obviously, I can't go over every battle. That's
Sure.
up to
Yeah.
Then after the first Battle of Matanikau came the second Battle of Matanikau, and that was kind of a meeting engagement. So after they dealt with Edson's Ridge, after Edson's Ridge battle was won, the remnants of Edson's Ridge and a guy called Major General Kawaguchi, the 35th Brigade of Japanese, had moved back, and they established defensive positions on Matanikau. Once again, they were going to hold there and wait for more Japanese reinforcements, because this time the Japanese are really starting to push units in there. So after the Battle of Edson's Ridge, the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters High Command had an emergency meeting. And they said, "Look, our offensive is going in Port Moresby and the Papa campaign. We're going to have to cease and suspend it, and all our reinforcements and all the resources going to Guadalcanal." The Americans have basically said this is going to be a decisive battle, so we need to pour everything we've got there. So the plans were starting to come in. They were getting the division, 2nd Division. They were getting a fleet, the combined fleet, something larger or just slightly smaller than the Midway fleet. They were all coming down to kick these Americans off once and for all. So they're getting all the plans in place. So Kawaguchi and his group, even though they'd got a bloody nose at Edson's Ridge, they were holding. So the plan was for the Marines. They said, "Well, we want to push the Japanese past Matanikau and all the way to Cucambona, because we want a bit of breathing space for the airfield." So they did a reconnaissance force that just received the 7th Marines, fresh reinforcements. So the 7th Marines, I think I've discussed it in other episodes, they were the pick of the division. They were sent to Samoa to be the first to fight, expecting Japanese to come and cut that vital American-Australian supply line or communication line. So they had some of the best NCOs, best officers, best equipment. So you're looking at Puller, Basilone, Page, Hannikin, legends or soon to be legends in the Marine Corps. So they, instead of being the first to fight, they came in almost 6 weeks later. But once they landed, Vandegrift was going to take advantage of them. So Puller was probably the most aggressive battalion commander he had. So they sent Puller and the 1st Raider Battalion on a reconnaissance and force to go to the Mount Matanikau, do a reconnaissance, and then continue on to Cucambona. And at Cucambona, that little village was a major trailhead. They were going to stage the 1st Raider Battalion there, and they were going to use that as a patrol base. But it allowed the whole breathing space and I guess standoff distance from the airfield. So I won't go into so much detail. It led to the second Battle of Matanikau, but let's just say that reconnaissance and force turned into an operation or offensive, which ended up with the little Dunkirk episode with Douglas Munro, and we've discussed it before, and the Marines almost, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, almost getting wiped out. The Marines were defeated and they pulled back. So they kind of got a reality check, I call it. The 1st Marine Division reality check, and the 2nd Battle Matanikau, because they had some of the best commanders and the best units involved. They suffered a defeat. So this leads us up to what I think is the most critical point, and in my opinion, the most important land battle of the whole campaign, which led to the turning point of the land campaign. I hate the term a turning point, but one of the turning points. It wasn't Edson's Ridge. It wasn't Galloping Horse. It wasn't, to me, this 3rd Battle of Matanikau is very important. So it leads to the whole importance of Matanikau. At this stage, after in late September, the Marines had established how important Matanikau River was. We need to hold to Matanikau. No matter what cost, we need to hold it. The integrity of the airfield is number one, but we can't allow the Japanese to beat it to Matanikau. One, if the Marines ever want to push the Japanese off the island, because the Japanese to the west, they have to have the Matanikau and pass past Matanikau. For the Japanese to take the Henderson Field, they'd have to have Matanikau and pass to the east of Matanikau.
Yeah.
So that, you say a tug of war. I'll say it's like a tug of war, and Matanikau's in the middle of the tug of war rope.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
So the Japanese in this big operation, like I said before, they were planning a giant operation, Operation X, reinforced division, a big major fleet. But they knew at this stage, the Americans had the Cactus Air Force, right, which was the Air Force on the unsinkable aircraft carrier Henderson Field. So during the day, the Americans controlled the sea lanes by air. And at night, the Japanese controlled the sea control by their surface ships. But the Japanese, the only way they could bring reinforcements in on what the Marines dubbed as Tokyo Express, was fast destroyers. The fast destroyer could come in at night, unload their supplies, and get out at night before the day came. Because if they're caught in the day, the American Air Force was going to chew them up, the Cactus Air Force.
Yeah.
But they only could bring in limited amount of supplies and limited amount of troops. So the Japanese were looking at a mass buildup. They wanted about 25,000 Japanese there. But they couldn't do it in dribs and drabs. So they said the only way we can do it is these large transports. We bring in large transport ships. We can offload thousands of men, tons of supplies, heavy artillery, tanks, all in one go. But unfortunately, we can't offload them during the night. We're going to be offloading during the day. If we leave them susceptible during the day, the Americans are going to kill us. So what do we have to do? We have to suppress the airfield. That was the number one thing. We have to suppress that Cactus Air Force. We have to suppress it. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a seaplane tender and we're going to land all this heavy artillery, 150 millimeter howitzers and 100 millimeter cannons. What we're going to do is, the Japanese, we're going to seize the east bank of the Matanikau River. We're going to call it the artillery firing platform. Once we've established the artillery firing platform, which is only 5 miles from the Henderson Field, we're going to commence 10 days of artillery bombardment on the airfield. We're going to suppress the airfield. Then 2 days before, and this is Admiral Yamamoto's idea, 2 days before, we're going to have a battleship bombardment. We're going to come down, and anything left that the artillery didn't get, we're just going to pulverize it. And during that time, we're just going to have massive air raids. We're just going to smash whatever the Americans had. And if the battleships didn't get them, we've got 2 more days of cruiser and destroyers just to clean up. So that would do it. And if they took the east bank of the Matanikau, that would allow them a jumping off or an offensive jumping off platform. So the tanks could cross over the mouth of Matanikau and just shoot off from there and go straight down the coast and go up to the east-west trail, which the Japanese had an east-west trail, which is parallel and in the hills, the northern slopes of Mount Austin. So they're not going to go straight down the coastline, because potentially if they go down the coastline, the American artillery and potentially planes could chew them up. But they'd have one force going down the coastline and another force moving through the lower hills. and take a place called the Kuma Ridges, which is, people don't even know about the Kuma Ridges. They're directly across the Lunga River from Henderson and Fire One airfields. You put direct fire weapons there, you could dominate everything. So that was the importance of the Matanikau. So the Japanese needed to grab it. The Marines needed to hold it. So it leads us to the third battle of Matanikau. So in the third battle of Matanikau, the Marines had a reinforced, basically had two regimental size of force attack. So this is, I don't know my glasses on. Now this is the fourth battle of Matanikau. This one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you might not have it, but
oh yeah. Here, let me just back up. I'll just go right here.
Yeah, that's fine. Or just throw the photo you had of the actual Matanikau River itself. You know, the black and white one. Well, that's fine. Leave it there, somewhere like that.
Here we go. Maybe I'll do this one here.
Yeah. So basically, what the Americans had planned to do, just roughly the same tactics was the same in every one of the battles. They were going to hold it to Mouth Matanikau and do enveloping sweeps. So what they were going to do is hold it to Matanikau, and then they were going to take the whole 7th Marines with 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, and a whaling group of scout snipers. They were going to move across Matanikau River upstream. There's 3 ridges that go north to south. They were just, each battalion was going to put a ridge, trap the Japanese, and destroy them at the mouth of Matanikau. So at the same time, the Japanese had a plan. The 4th Infantry Regiment was there. It just landed, well, parts of them, and other parts of the 2nd Sendai Division was coming in. So they told Kawaguchi, send at least a battalion over and just hold it for now. And Kawaguchi said, well, I'm not going to send any troops over. We're pretty much spent. And plus, I forgot what his exact wordings, but paraphrasing, I've got it in my book. He says, I don't want my troops to be artillery and aircraft fodder. If I put them over, them up. So he was ordered directly from Lieutenant General Hayakitake, the 17th Army Commander, to do it. So he sent a token force over. And then a couple of days before, the Japanese had managed to send a reinforced company over. So they'd have us, and they started digging in on the east bank. So the Japanese on the 9th of October had planned to send the rest of their regiment over. No, sorry, the 8th of October. And the Americans on the 7th of October had planned to do an assault. So you had 2 forces both running into each other on attacks, but the Americans beat them to the punch. So long story short, the Americans beat the Japanese at 3rd Battle Matanikau and denied the Japanese an artillery firing platform and a jumping off point for the attack. Now, after that, Vandergeer said, I can't afford not to lead this to the Japanese. So he's left 2 reinforced battalions at the mouth on the east bank of Matanikau, and they dug in. You know, he knew that potentially the integrity of the perimeter, he was weakening it, but he couldn't afford not to let the Japanese take that east bank. But what that battle did, the whole Japanese plan, like I said before, of attacking straight down the coast and those northern slopes of Mount Austin, and it was a spanner in the wrench, or a spanner in the gears, or a wrench in the gears. So I'm just flipping back before Australian and American there. It really derailed their plans. So instead of going straight down, they go, well, how are we going to do it now? So staff officers run at Mount Austin. They had a look. They said, oh, we could probably go through the thick jungle and come and hit the Americans in the southern perimeter, because we don't think that's really held too much. A surprise attack. We can do a diversion area at the mouth of Matanikau, what the Americans think that was the main way we're going to attack, and we'll just come, we'll build a 15-mile road through the jungle and send the bulk of the 2nd Division around that jungle, and using the Japanese strengths of speed, shock, and surprise. I forgot what Merle Twining, the planning officer of the division, said, the Japanese propensity to something to use the terrain. But that was what they planned to do. And you'll see, I won't go into, and it leads us to the Battle of Henderson Field, and how we'll find out that the jungle really attrited and broke up the unit cohesion, which the Americans thought, if any force did come through that thick jungle, would occur, and it did. But the whole 3rd Battle of Matanikau was the key it led to the largest fight, the largest offensive the Japanese had, which is the Battle of Henderson Field in late October. And then after the Japanese, spoiler here, Japanese lost the battle, Americans want to take advantage. Vannegar said, "Look, my guys are pretty much spent. You know, that we've been here. They're sick. They've been under constant bombardment. They're weakened. The dysentery. They got diseases. Malaria's kicked in, but we still need to do an attack to take advantage of the Japanese because we've just defeated them. Plus, remember, the Japanese had almost roughly a whole division spread out in the jungle, and the trailhead was at Kukumbona. If the Marines could push through and break the Japanese defenses around the Matanikau, they could push to Kukumbona and cut a whole division off, end the whole campaign. Yeah. So Vandergrift scraped together what was to be the largest U.S. Marine attack in its history to that date, land attack. He scraped it together, and that leads us up to the 4th Battle of Matanikau, fought between the 1st and 3rd of November. So this is the 5th Battle of Matanikau. Yeah, it gets confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah, here we go.
So that led to that, and the Marines ended up defeating the Japanese and destroying a whole pocket of Japanese at the Point Cruise line. And it looked like, hey, the finish lines, we can see it. But once again, just like everything in the Guadalcanal campaign, the naval, everything's interconnected, naval, air, and sea. So the naval campaign interacted with the land campaign. They both flow from each other. So at this stage, Japanese had intelligence they were landing something at Coley Point, or the group at Coley Point, which is on the other side of the perimeter, which is just about 11 miles from the perimeter to the east. So they had to suspend the operation here, deal with the mess over at Coley Point. Once they've dealt with that, they recommenced the attack on the 10 November, the Marine Corps birthday, with another group of Marines, the 2nd Marines, some of the Army then, the 164th, and with the 8th Marines coming in. So everything was going good. Kukumbona was in sight. They're only 1,500 yards from Kukumbona. Then what's happened? Leads to the naval battle of Guadalcanal, the big push by the Japanese, because once again, the Japanese weren't giving up. They were coming in major assault with 11 transports, and it led to the famous battleship on battleship in the mid-November series of fights between the 13th and 15th or 16th of November, which was kind of the turning point of the naval campaign.
So one of the things, and you've kind of made mention of it a few times, or at least alluded to it, where you talk about the Japanese accounts. And one thing that I have absolutely loved about your book is you're not just seeing this from the American perspective, but there's a strong element where you're offering up things from the Japanese perspective and giving primary source accounts from that. Can you talk a little bit about like how that came about? Like where did you come across these Japanese sources?
Well, first, it's like any good investigator. Imagine doing a criminal brief. You don't tell them one side of the story.
Yeah.
You got to speak. And as you're a history teacher, to learn history, you've got to study it all. And that's why, I guess, as an investigator, I could look at things with an unbiased, objectable outlook to try to find the truth. Even though, obviously, sometimes on a Facebook page, why the Japanese there? Because, the Japanese, and they kill all these people. They're very brutal. But I'm not study them. But what you just like, say, for example, I'm interviewing a murderer who's just, say, killed kids or whatever. Just probably the worst thing you can think in your head. You've got to do it yourself, right? And pull your emotions down and be very professional to get the truth, to be able to either convict or potentially not convict this person. So I look at it the same way. To me, I want to draw all the Japanese resources in because there's two sides to every story. And also, you got to study the Japanese to learn really what happened. Resource. So once again, a lot of the Japanese resources are in Japanese, obviously. But I had a good contact with the Japanese historian. And plus, you can take your phone and Google Translate. Isn't that bad? Osho is Japanese official records. I mean, you can get them online, all in Japanese. Japanese Defense Institute, I think it's called.
Okay.
Yep, and it's very painstaking because each page gets up there. You take the photo of the page, hit the translation, and that's like anything. You don't take it into its totality. You get because entirety there's other sources to document it and back it up. You go, well, that's one piece of puzzle. Then you go other pieces and read all these things, and then you formulate and corroborate your evidence. But it's not a bad resource. Richard Frank, when he's written his great book, to me, is the best overall Guadalcanal book, Guadalcanal. He's tapped into that many, many years ago, but he had a Japanese translator. But then this Japanese historian I got has sent me documents that in newsletters, histories written by the Veterans Association, say like the 124th Regiment, or the 4th Infantry Regiment, or the 1st Tank, the ones that charged across Matanikau. I've got their history written by the veterans and written by in like the 70s and 80s. And that's why I got some of the primary accounts. Some of the diaries, captured diaries, they're in there. There's a lot of diaries.
Wow.
Australian War Memorial is great. They're a great resource. They have some of the AT Essex translated Japanese interrogation reports from the prisoners. They have those. You can read a lot of those, and you get a lot of information from that. So yeah, that was some of the stuff. And plus, once walking the ground, studying he's moved, and you can look at some of the maps and go, well, that doesn't make sense until you walk on the ground. You go, well, yeah, okay. Now I know where they crossed the creek or cross the river here, because here's one ravine, there's another ravine. They're not going to cross there because it's straight up. Little things like that. You can connect the dots. But yeah, there was one instance in Little Dunkirk where it was a great connection, where I'm reading the Japanese corporal's account, and then I'm reading a Marine private first class account. There's only one heavy machine gun there, and both of them, they're telling it from both sides. And I know exactly what they're talking about. It's like, these Marines said, I'm holding this, the Japanese are rushing at us, I'm firing the guns. I see this corporal go down, another guy go down, dead. We run back. The Japanese said, we see these 4 Americans. We charge toward them. Guy to my left gets shot, and the captain gets shot. And then we run past the American machine gun. There's 2 dead Americans there. It's like, well, there you go. It's just that connection.
Incredible. Huh. So we'll go ahead and bring this back up. We'll continue on here.
So then after the Americans, they got the Coocabbana, the 10th of November, they're doing quite well. The big fleet was coming back. This is real bitter, because at that stage, the Americans had to pull back. Once again, they got to protect the perimeter, the airfields. They had to pull all the way back. All that ground they just paid for in blood. But instead of pulling all the way back to the perimeter, once again, they didn't want to leave the Matanikau. So they pulled back to the east bank of Matanikau. They had footbridges. They dismantled the footbridges and all that stuff they've left. So the ex-Marines had dug in there. And then once the Japanese transports and the reinforcement attempt was defeated, it's time to go on the offensive again. So at this stage, the Army, the rest of the 164th, the rest of the Matanikau Division had arrived. And General Patch, who was the Major General Alexander Patch, who was the Army commander, this is going to be really the first operation under Army command. So it was going to be set piece battle. They were going to secure the west bank of Matanikau at Point Cruz Line. They were going to build up supplies, artillery. Then we're going to gradually push down, right? The nice set piece Army battle. And that's when we had the 182nd Regiment, and this all kicked off on the 17th of November. And it led to the 5th Battle of the Matanikau. And this was a draw. And it was a hard fight, because the Japanese had fortified that line there called the Point Cruz Line. They'd fortified it. Nice reverse slope positions, mutually supporting machine gun bunkers, Japanese knee mortars or grenade launchers, riflemen. They'd built a strong defense. I mean, you've been in that ravine, Jay, part that is. So it built it on that. So the 164th Regiment, the 182nd Regiment, and the 8th Marines came in. They battered themselves across that line for about 5 days, and the Japanese stopped them. And that's another thing about writing this book. I want to debunk a few myths, and I think hopefully I've debunked the U.S. Army mopping up myth, which is one of my kind of pet peeves. There was no mopping up. Something I learned long ago is like the popular thing. The Marines landed, held the airfield, fought Bloody Ridge, fought Alligator Creek, defended Henderson Field. The battle was won, basically, and the Army come in and mopped up. And that was it. Oh, and the 2nd Marine Division is not even mentioned. This as soon as the Marines left, and it was a whole Army show, which is entirely wrong. I mean, 5th Battle of Matanikau. At this stage, when we're going to December, both forces are offensively spent. No one can move backwards or forth. There were like 2 prize fighters, I always say it, in a ring. Both can't fight, or they're so exhausted. No one can advance.
Yeah.
So both sides were waiting for reinforcements. Remember, the Japanese not giving up. They're waiting to go on the offensive again. The Americans said,
the Japanese are almost starving to death at this point.
They're in a holding action, but they've been promised 2 whole divisions to come in. And they're going to recommence a big assault in January. They're not giving up on Guadalcanal. They want to take Guadalcanal. The Americans, and that's why he had General Millard Harmon, who was the South Pacific Army commander, was pushing to get the Marines out of there because they need relief. And they said, we don't have any other troops to put in there. We've got the Matanikau, but the Matanikau was basically spent then. They were enough just to hold Henderson and hold the Matanikau, but they couldn't go on the offensive. And the 1st Marine Division was basically leaving. So the 25th Infantry Division, the regular division from Hawaii, was on the way to Australia for MacArthur. And then Millard Harmon basically pleaded and begged and said, look, we need someone to come in. So with Halsey, who was the South Pacific commander at the time, was his influence. They basically convinced Marshall to tell MacArthur. MacArthur said, yeah, okay, fine. But you got to promise the amphibious division later, which hence that's how he got the 1st Marine Division, and we'll see later. But anyway, J. Lawton Collins was very switched on division commander of the 25th. So they're en route. They stop in New Caledonia, right? So all of their ships are admin packed. They're ready to go to Australia. You know, some of them don't even have their proper uniform. Go in there. He goes, meet Halsey. Halsey says, you're going to Guadalcanal. He goes, oh, Lawton being a good commander. Okay, sir, no problem, but I need to get my ships rejigged and everything. I need to get my troops. He goes, give me 3 weeks. He goes, you're leaving tomorrow. They took that gamble to go, we send in, admin. And they did. They sent them in by mid-January, they're ready to go for the big offensive to kick off. But yeah, and what happened for 6 weeks at Point Cruz, and I go a lot in my book, it was World War I, the Point Cruz line. So both sides are doing daily mortar barrages, artillery barrages, sniping, machine gun at night, night raids, infiltration, things like that. So 6 weeks, that was the front line. It just went into that. And plus you got Mount Austin with the Japanese up there dug in, and the Army trying to hold them up there too. So yeah, it was dug in. Then, which leads us to the 10th of January and the big kickoff to the major American offensive. And then after 10th of January, the big offensive up Mount Austin, that's when you have Seahorse and Galloping Horse. Once they take that, then it opens up more maneuvering room to the left at the Point Cruz line. And then on the 13th, between the 13th and 17th, the 8th Marines are fighting on that Point Cruz line. And I go in a lot of detail on that. And writing a book, that was real eye-opener for me about what the 8th Marines did in those fighting on that Point Cruz line. I think I'm going to write an article for Leatherneck magazine, and I'm going to call it the Innovative 8th Marines. Because some of the tactics they were using in January resembled, well, it was the groundwork for the later tactics used by the Marines and the blowtorch and corkscrew tactics they used in later campaigns to take out fortified positions. Because some of the innovative things the 8th Marines were doing, and I really go into a lot of detail in my book about this, because before, when they're attacking on the ravines, you've been there, they're going can you speak? Anyway. Yeah. It's sad. Kids out here, the cat's trying to get him. Basically, they were attacking from one ridge to the other.
Yeah.
But what they decided, and the Japanese were putting the machine guns on the upper part of the ravines and firing down in inflated fire. So what they were going to do, they attack the upper part of the ravine and attack an echelon. So take out these machine guns firing down, and then do it like that. Plus, they were doing, they put shotguns, like 27 shotguns per battalion. They're taking their engineers and embedding them into the rifle squads, which hadn't been done before. They had 50-gallon drums of gasoline with TNT charges in them. So once they'd taken the rear pillboxes, so the rest of them support, then they just roll them up to the back of the other ones. These pillboxes were made of coral. They call them the coral. And they were blasting them. Then they were bringing up the 37 millimeter anti-tank guns, the half tracks, the self-propelled half tracks with the 75 millimeters on them, and they were using them to smash into the direct fire. They were using like canister rounds on the 37 millimeters and using little techniques, because these Japanese igloo defenses were very well camouflaged. So they'd fire canister rounds where they'd suspect the Japanese position to be as a defoliant. They were shredding the vegetation off. Oh, there's a Japanese pillbox. Next few rounds of armor piercing straight in there. Bang, bang, bang. They smash them. They tried to use tanks, but the tanks always had some issues on Guadalcanal. Mechanical, especially the M3 Stuarts.
It's not exactly tank country either. Like I grew up in the Ozarks, and the hills and ridges that we have in the Ozarks are nothing compared to what they have on Guadalcanal. It's wild.
Down in there, they didn't like them too much, but yeah, they were using those type of techniques, very innovative techniques. They were using first time flamethrowers used by American military. I know in World War II might have been their history. I was trying to find if it was ever used in World War I, but definitely in World War II. That brown. Guess what model the first flamethrowers were? Think U.S. military. What was the first model of everything is going to be?
Well, you would think it would be an M1, but
yep.
Okay.
One helmet, M1 letter opener.
Yeah.
But the Marines actually, Army was using them that day too. They had a few of them, but they couldn't use them due to number of reasons that malfunctioned. Plus, they couldn't really get them employed. But the Marines did. The Marines used 4 of them. They killed or they destroyed like 4 pillboxes. So that was the first use of the flamethrowers in combat on 1943. So yeah, it's a lot of innovative techniques they were using. And one of the guys, a guy called Donald Yarmy, PFC Donald Yarmy. You might know him from Get Smart, Don Adams.
Oh, okay.
About him there. He's an I3, I Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines. He's a PFC. Didn't do anything special, but he obviously fought through there. And I talk about what 3-8 did. The thing about Yarmy, I have his records. There's a lot of misinformation out there about him on that subject about Don Adams. Yes, he wasn't he wasn't wounded. He was never wounded in the war. He did catch a bad case of malaria. He spent the rest of the war really in and out of hospitals. I know in 1945, his records, he's at the brig, a U.S. Navy brig, as a brig guard in New York State. He was never a drill instructor. So there's some of the things you read in some of the accounts. But yeah, that was I'll really go into detail about that January account. I'm actually quite proud of that account because you will never find that in any other books. I mean, it's very just briefly spoken about, but
I think this is one of the great values of studying the Guadalcanal campaign is because these guys it's a lot of on the job training and a lot of the things that you see being developed on Guadalcanal, like you said, is going to be used throughout the whole Pacific War. And like I said, your book is absolutely incredible. I can't wait for it to hit the bookshelves and get on people's doorsteps, because like I was telling you before we started here, it's not just because you're a friend that I'm saying this. The book is truly incredible, and it's packed with information, and it's stuff that I've never seen or heard any of the Guadalcanal books that I've read, but it's not dry. It reads really well and has a good flow to it. So, yeah, I'm, I'm, you should be definitely proud of what you've created.
Well, thanks, JD. Yeah, I like the who said we're friends? But anyway, I'm just joking. Marine humor. Yeah, I like first-hand accounts. I always love the first-hand accounts because my book's more of an operational. I do talk about strategic, but it's mainly operational and tactical view. And those first-hand accounts really make it. And that's why and it's good for reading. Everyone likes stories. There's a lot of got access to a lot of unpublished diaries and accounts that you won't find anywhere else. And I tapped into those. Which
on top of that, there are, and people can just get the book and read it for themselves. There are some really good leadership lessons that are interwoven into this book. It's not just a strict dry history. There's a lot of applicable things in there as well.
Yeah, one especially on the 27th of August, the Cochabamba incident. We have a Marine Battalion commander, and I think that's an excellent study. And actually, when I was writing it up, I said, "Man, this would have been a good study, especially for NCOs and junior officers." And
are you talking about Maxwell?
It's a good PM
professional.
It can be used for that. It was a good case study about how the centralization of command and not knowing the commander's intent, and how if you did allow that initiative and decentralization of command, how that young platoon commander could have took advantage of it and destroyed the Japanese and won the battle, but he was so hamstrung by basically a micromanaging leader. So yeah, that's a good. And I did that. There's quite a number in there, especially case studies on logistics and how the lack of water will stop a unit in its tracks, and the supplies and jungle. Very applicable to today's environment, especially fighting and I guess the littoral regions, you could say.
Yeah. Do you have some time to take a few questions?
Yeah. Oh, I can't see the chat, but we actually got.
Yeah. Here, I'll bring it up. Let me go back here. So here's one from Sander VK History. How pivotal was the Battle of Guadalcanal in shifting the strategic balance of the Pacific War? And do you think the Japanese could have recovered their momentum if they could have held the island longer?
Well, the first bit, yeah, it's like I said earlier, it's not. I don't like turning points. It was a series of turning points. Like Midway, Midway allowed the Americans to have a slot, open up a window for a counteroffensive. I mean, Admiral King has already planned to do the counteroffensive to log in the surrounding islands. Stage 1 of Operation Pestilence to take Rabaul. You have one of the myths of the Guadalcanal campaign was, they seen them build an airfield and then decided just to quickly invade. But no, the plans were already there. It was always going to be Tulagi. So the 6-month the 6-month campaign, I look at Guadalcanal and also look at the neighboring Papua New campaign in Papua New Guinea by the Australians and Americans fighting there. The Japanese looked at it as a single campaign. The Americans and Australians look at it, and Americans look at both as two separate ones. But the Japanese, in fact, Lieutenant General Hayakatake, the 17th Army commander, was running both campaigns from a jungle ravine on Guadalcanal, which was quite amazing. But once that campaign ended in January 43 at Buna and Gona when they defeated the Japanese, and then the February campaign of Guadalcanal ended. I call it the 1-2 punch of the Pacific War, because after that, to me, a real turning point is when you see the strategic shift of initiative from offensive to defense. And this is a really clear-cut indication where you really see that, because even after Midway, the Japanese were still on the offensive.
Yeah.
After New Guinea, Papua defeats for them, they were always on, and we're not talking about China, Burma, India, we're talking about the Pacific. They were always on the defensive. And from then on, the Allies could set the initiative and set where they're going to attack next.
It's the beginning of the war for the Americans, but it's the high water mark for the Japanese.
And the second question was if the Japanese had held Guadal. What was the second bit? Because I can't see the question.
Yeah, the second bit was, do you think the Japanese could have recovered any momentum if they could have held the island longer?
Potentially, because once again, but they were losing the race on the supplies coming in because they couldn't. That's another fallacy. The Japanese, their logisticals, they wasn't great at logistics. But one thing, they had the supplies. They were sitting at Rabaul. They just couldn't get it to the island.
Yeah.
Cactus Air Force was a force multiplier. And they tried submarines, they tried fast destroyers, but I think even if all these fast destroyers come in, they could supply them for like 2 days worth of food. So if the Japanese could have got everything they wanted on the island, and they were able to hold off the Americans, but they were just losing. They just lost the logistical race and reinforcement race. So I don't think they built up the momentum because they'd have to stop the Americans from building up their momentum. So they'd have to establish complete control of the air. They recognized they had to control the air, and that's when they started building other air bases, like you'll see at Munda in New Georgia. They were trying to build forward air bases to try to. And once those forward air bases are built in November, December, they were going to try to build up a massive amount of air to try to defeat the Americans and to gain air control. But as long as the Americans gain air control, the Japanese would never have the momentum.
Yeah. Here's another question from Peace to You. It says, are there still relics turning up on the canal, or are they getting fewer with all the development going on?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's relics everywhere, and some of these relics are unexploded ordnance, which is a major concern for the population there. I mean, especially around the Matanikau region, that place was built on top of the battlefield, and then became a large logistical and training base. I have all the range maps, and then especially in the hills above Matanikau, that was a lot of artillery and naval gunfire. And there was every time now as the population encroaches up into the hills to build, they're uncovering unexploded ordnance. There's relics everywhere. You go on my YouTube channel and you'll see a lot of relics. I mean, unfortunately, you see a lot, but unfortunately, you come across a lot of unexploded ordnance. And all you don't touch, tilt, or tamper. Don't mess with it. It's like a snake. You know, my dad said never touch a snake because that's when my what did he say? He said, he's in Alabama. He goes, if it's on the ground, it's a rattlesnake. If it's in water, it's a water moccasin. That's
yeah. Just to add to that, kind of going along with that question, because I'm guessing there's probably some other thoughts behind that question. On Guadalcanal, you can't take relics off of the island. Unless you get a permit of some kind through the museum or something.
Yeah, no, even no shell casings. They consider just a shell casing the ammunition. So this is garnered on the War Relic Act. And the main reason for that is one, to preserve the history. I think the primary reason is for safety, because tourists want the relics, which they don't. I'm a relic guy too, but what that causes, third world country. The kids basically go up to the tourists and sell relics. Could be a button or a badge or even a shell casing. But what that makes the kids do, they go out and they dig it around UXOs, unexploded ordnance. And I've been there. Also, I've seen, fortunately, I haven't seen any dead children. I've seen dead adults. But I've seen children's hand blown off and lost an eye and things like that from just digging around. So they could get money to sell it to the tourists. Which third world country, it's always going to continue, because if they don't do it, then they'll see a friend doing it and stuff like that. So that's why we try to discourage it. I understand why it's done, but I try to discourage it as much as I can.
Sure. Okay. One more question here. How involved were the 2-2 and 3-2 Marines in the Matanikau operations? And does your book cover these units in any significant detail?
Yes, and yes. Very involved. In fact, when I was talking about the 3rd Battle of Matanikau, 3-2 had been brought over mid September. I'll just say mid September. Hold on, I should know everything. Hold on, 3-2. encyclopedia. They were brought over on the I think it's 16th of September. Anyway, they brought over Tulagi because the 2nd Marines are over Tulagi. They brought 3-2 over. The rest of the 2nd Marines stayed on Tulagi. 3-2 then joined with Bill Whaling in his Whaling group, about 100 scout snipers. So they were the lead element in the battle of the 3rd Matanikau. They led 3-2. So they're heavily involved there, and I go into quite a detail of 3-2 under Robert Hill, who was the battalion commander, and when they're taking it, the western bank of the Matanikau. And then the 2nd Marines, when 3-2 was rotated back, when I talk about the 4th Battle Matanikau on 1 November, 3-2 went back to Tulagi, and they brought the whole 2nd regiment over. So they were heavily involved in those attacks from the 4th of November and all the way into January, because I go into a lot of detail about 1-2, 2-2, fighting in November at around Point Cruz, Rove area, and then in January when they kick off the 13th of. So to answer your question, if you're a fan of the 2nd Marines, you a lot of detail. I gave them a lot of love. I gave the 2nd Marines a lot of love and the 8th Marines a lot of love because no loving. They're and the poor 2nd Marines, they were the first unit to land in the Guadalcanal campaign.
Yeah.
And they were on the Point Cruz line. They watched the 1st Marine Division sail away. So they're pretty much bitter. They were fighting and dying on the Point Cruz line in January. So,
yeah. All right, cool. So tell us what you got going on now, because are you okay with talking about your follow-up?
Yeah. I'm finished. In fact,
you're finished.
I was writing a bibliography until you bothered me this morning. Yeah, so it's part of my first book. It isn't a sequel, so to speak, but it's a companion to it. I had all the information. I got a bit of habit of writing too. I didn't do it after a whole year writing. I'll just continue what I've got. I wanted to tell the U.S. Army story on Guadalcanal. There's only been one book written about it, and it was by John Miller, who was actually a Marine too. Funny that he's written the official version in the Army Green series, the official version series of war. And his is on Guadalcanal, the First Offensive, wrote in 1949. That's the only dedicated Army book of the campaign. I mean, there's great Army memoirs and books, but they only talk about specific parts of the campaign they were in. And there's some unit histories like the 164th and the 147th, but there's no overall book on the U.S. Army. And during the course of writing my first book, I mean, I said, man, the U.S. Army was so heavily involved. And even before that, I knew that how involved the U.S. Army was, but it really opened my eyes. And plus, too, I wrote this for the veterans' families, because in my Facebook site, I'm very interactive. I speak to quite a number of people, and I always get in veterans' families. Either my dad or my granddad or my uncle was on Guadalcanal. He was with the Army, or he was with the 2nd Marines or the 8th Marines or the 6th Marines. I never heard about them. And then this Army kept coming up, and the more I read about the Army and how deeply involved, especially the 25th Infantry Division in Collins and the hard fighting the 164th did in all the Army units. I'm thinking, man, this is no mop up. These guys were fighting very hard.
Yeah.
Story needs to be told. And there was some, even though the book, I'll finish writing it. I mean, I've got the book proposal out and it's up to an agent now and a few other things. So it's in, hopefully this time next year, you'll see it. But it also covers Marine actions. It's not really covered that much detail in other books. Like, I couldn't focus when I write my Matanikau book. I do blend in all the other battles for context. Like I do talk about Bloody Ridge, but I'll put them in context. Just like I'll include some of the naval, because all interacted, all connected.
Sure.
Do a focus, say, for example, on Coley Point, which is the Battle of Coley Point was a very important battle, a very confusing battle. That was one of the hardest chapters I wrote. But that's a big Marine element in there. I mean, it's only, you covered it in your YouTube. It's the only place where, the famous Marine Chesty Puller was ever wounded in his 38-year combat career. And you got Hannikin, Puller, you got 7th Marines, you got 164. So that was a hard fight that really hadn't been told in detail. And then by studying that fight, I've learned a lot of new stuff, and so that's covered quite well. And I really covered the galloping horse and the bloody and the seahorse and the Gifu and Mount Austin fights in detail. I'll talk about the push. So yeah, there's a lot of material there. You know, the push to Cucamonga, then the pursuit, and then other smaller U.S. Army actions, and then some of the Japanese actions, like some of the air commando raids they did, which not really mentioned much when they hit a few things up in December, and that was quite interesting because I've got some of their diaries, the ones that lived. It's very interesting. But yeah, I thought there was definitely a need for it. I used to say 104. I think I got 106. Not all the right behind me Guadalcanal books, and I reckon there's about 150 other Guadalcanal books written, air, sea, and land. But there's another need for it. And definitely a need for this one. There's only been one Army book written, so I think it appeal for anyone interested in the Guadalcanal campaign, especially the U.S. Army and the Marines too, because the Marines are, once again, it's a very joint fight. And there's a good thing about the Guadalcanal campaign. It was a big. It taught a lot of people about joint operations because everyone's involved in it.
Yeah.
So mingled. So if you're, the Marine, you go, I don't want to listen to Army stuff. There's a lot of Marine stuff in here too that you'll learn. That's project. We'll see it out.
Well, of all of those Guadalcanal books, I think that yours is going to stand the test of time and really rank up there as among one of the best, because it's absolutely incredible. But yeah, appreciate you coming on here tonight. A little disappointed that you didn't get around to talking about Taylor Swift's grandpa or anything, but
11th Marines.
Maybe
no one's going to watch. No one's going to watch this video now. You just.
I know. I just poisoned the well.
Earl Swift, 11th Marines. He did a good job.
All right. Well, cool. Yeah, I'd like to have you back on here one time or sometime, and maybe talk about the birth of the Scout Snipers and the whaling group at some point. I think that'd be a cool one to tackle.
Oh, that was my one thing. I really, if someone gave me a wish, is to know more about that, because once again, they were just an ad hoc group and they're not really on the muster rolls, and I'm really struggling to find a lot. And that's really, really want to know about those guys.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming on.
I've enjoyed the talk, JD, and I know we went over a little bit, but yeah, I've always enjoyed talking with you and about Guadalcanal. So
absolutely. All right. Well, there you go. So Guadalcanal, Dave Holland's book, like I said, I can't heap enough praise on it. Go out and order it if you haven't pre-ordered it already. You will definitely be glad that you did. Going to be back on for another live stream tomorrow. If you are a fan of the podcast, The Unauthorized History of the Pacific War, well, you're probably going to like the live stream that we have tomorrow. So anyway, be sure to check back in at 3 Eastern, 2 Central tomorrow. All right, thanks.